Hey guys, Paul here with Patek Photography and Gear Reviews. In this video, which is probably going to be a little bit longer, I am going to demystify speedlights, radio triggers, monoblocks, studio strobes for beginners. I did a video not too long ago on the Godox X1R and I got a lot of comments. Oh my God, thank you so much. Nobody else is covering this. How come? What's going on? When do I use my sync cable? When can I use TTL manual trigger? Yada, yada. So that's what this video is going to be all about. I'm going to start where I started with you, which was my Nikon D200 in 2005 with an SB600 speedlight, and I'm going to take it from there. And I'm going to talk about the speedlights, OEM, third party, Pro Photo, Broncolor, you name it. Anything I can think of that's going to help you guys, we're going to cover it in this video. So strap in, this might be a little bit of a long one. Okay, so now you got your cup of coffee and you're all sitting back, relaxed with your feet up. We can get started here. In 2005, I bought the Nikon D200, which is first of the super cameras as far as I'm concerned. And it was a great camera. I don't use it anymore. I've got 3 of the bloody things, but still a fantastic camera. Shoots 10 megapixels. But, you know, once you start to get into photography, the first thing you realize is you need to have some kind of a speedlight or some kind of a flash. So speedlights, so flash, fill flash, or speedlights, all the same thing. And this was the cheapest offering that Nikon had, Nikon being OEM, original equipment manufacturer. And so this is where I started. This was a speedlight that I had. And, you know, I started learning about fill flash and, you know, you back someone up to the sun and they're going to have a shadow on their face and you got to fill in the flash. And this is what you're going to use. And then you start learning about bounce cards. This one here should have came up, but so a bounce card is just a little white tab that pops up here. Some of the speedlights have them, some of them don't. This one doesn't. This one, when you put the diffuser on, it just gives you kind of a wide angle. It diffuses the light a little bit. But yeah, this is where I started. And then at the time, there was a guy named Fong who was, you know, a world famous wedding photographer, really knowledgeable in the photography business. And he came out with a genius idea, or a genius product, and it was called the Fong Light Sphere. I call it the Idiot Dome. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll understand why I call it the Idiot Dome. This thing basically just pops on to your flash like that. You can run around a wedding reception and I defy you to get a bad picture. This is a really solid product. Okay, now this thing is probably 10 or 12 years old now. This was the original light sphere from Fong. He has a new one which is collapsible, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But if you're just getting started, I wouldn't recommend buying OEM speedlights because they're twice the price of third-party speedlights like Godox. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about Godox because I've bought into the Godox ecosystem. I mean, it's just great. All the triggers, all the flashes talk together, and that's what you want. You want one system that's going to work on the camera that you're using at the time and give you a decent result. But this is where I started. And so the bottom line here is if you're getting into photography, you're going to need some kind of a speed light. I don't recommend OEM. I recommend third party. And then you may want to take a look at the latest 5th generation Fong light sphere. Okay, so now we can make the segue into radio triggers, because when you're a beginning photographer, you know, what any person normally will do is they'll take their camera like so, they'll take the speed light, put it on the hot shoe, and start taking pictures like this. And the problem with this is, you'll find out, is that this is no different than shining a flashlight into somebody's eyes. You're going to get the red eye effect because, you know, the light coming out of the speed light is going directly to the person's eye and coming right back to the camera, and that's what generates the red eye. So the whole purpose or the reason for radio triggers is to be able to take your camera or take your speed light off the camera and fire it remotely. And that's where radio triggers come into play. They help you get rid of the red eye, and they give you more artistic effect. Or when you move the speed light off the camera and you put it up at a 45-degree angle, now you're mimicking natural light, and that's what we want. That's why we need to have radio triggers for our cameras. So the first set of speed lights or radio triggers that I ever invested in was the Yongnuo system for Nikon. And this is a YN563. This sucker was wildly popular. I don't use it anymore because I don't use my Nikon system, but really simple to use, really inexpensive, like 75 bucks compared to probably $150 or $200 for OEM. And so this was the way that I went. And if you pop this up here, oh, this is going to make a liar out of me. There we go. There's that little white bounce card that I was trying to show you on the SB600. But most speedlights will have that. So pop this down like so. And the only thing about the YN563s was that you can control them with a set of simple radio triggers like these. These are Yongnuo RF-603Ns. And I actually have a set of these that work on my Sony a7 III. For some reason, I can plug the cable into the multi-sync port on the a7 III, and I can press the button in here, and I find it, really useful for taking pictures because it's immediate. There's no infrared lag, no nothing. This thing works really good. So these radio triggers, they'll work on Sony a7 III. Unfortunately, they don't work on the a7 IV. The multi-sync port is just a multi-sync port. End of story. But the bottom line is, if you're going to use a set of radio triggers like this, then what you've got to do is, this one goes on the top here. You have another one of these on the bottom of the Speedlite, and when you fire the camera, the flash will fire. But the beauty is that you can have your Speedlite off of the camera. And then the next thing that came along, sort of in the same vein, is Yongnuo came out with a master controller. And this was really cool because the master controller gives you an LCD display of, you can have 2 or 3 different speedlights connected. So you can have a key light, a hair light, another fill light someplace else. And this basically would sit on top of the camera like this. You'd have your LCD readout on the back here, and then your radio trigger sat like this. And the problem with this was that it was a little bit precarious sitting on top of a light stand or something like that, but that's what we had back in the day, and it worked just fine. And then, so fast forward a year or so, can't remember exactly when they came out with it, but Yongnuo came out with the YN560 Mark IV, and it has the radio trigger built in. So now to shoot, all I need is this guy on top of the camera, this guy sitting over wherever, and pointing at the model, and away we go. You can get some great pictures that way. So things got quite a bit streamlined when the manufacturers started building the radio triggers in to the speedlights. So the next thing that happened, I guess, with the Yongnuo system is that initially they started out with a manual system here, and then they came with the controller. So the controller would control the speedlights. That's great, but there was no TTL. And so what happened was Yongnuo came out with the YN568EX. So this is a TTL flash. And they had another trigger, which was kind of a black shiny thing that would fit on top of your hot shoe here, and it would control TTL speedlights. So they started with manual, they went to TTL, high-speed sync was part of that as well, and that's basically where I stopped with the Yongnuo system. So another example, or another brand manufacturer of radio triggers that I got involved with was Fodox. And Fodox came out with a really nice radio trigger that would do manual or TTL with a set of triggers that came along with it. And it wasn't an inexpensive system. I think it was $400 or $500 at the time. This kit was actually provided to me by Fodox back in the day. I did a video on it, and I'll put a link in the description for you so you can check that one out. But again, it's just another way to have a controller on top of your camera, like so, and then, but again, you had to have the speedlight sitting on top of the trigger. And the problem with that is a little bit precarious. But that was sort of my evolution, right? Started out with the 563, then got into TTL. I'm not sure where along the way I picked up the Fodox system, what year it was, but like I say, I'll put a link to the video in the description so you can have a look at that one. But it's basically just choices. I found the Fodox system to be very reliable. They even built one for the Sony system. And at the time that I was converting to Sony, Godox was starting to come to the marketplace. And so I started taking a look at Godox, and the thing I like about Godox, we'll show you this in a second, is that they have a number of different triggers. They all talk to each other, speedlights, the whole ecosystem talks to each other. And that's basically where I am today with my Sony system. Everything I use is based on the Godox system. Okay, so the next thing I thought I would get into is maybe just kind of segue to get us closer to where we are at present day here. So here's a little Godox TT350 flash for Sony. And here is a Flashpoint R2 Pro N for Nikon. And so I showed you a couple of triggers earlier that were either manual controllers or manual and TTL. Well, here's another version from Godox. And this simply, a lot of people like this style because it goes onto the hot shoe like that, and it's fairly easy to see the LCD readout. You know, you press the shutter and it fires your flash. And so pretty straightforward. Now this camera, I just checked the battery on it, so all my batteries for this camera are dead, but I'm going to show you examples in a second when we get into the Sony system. I'll demonstrate all of this stuff for you. But so basically, you've got the most rudimentary manual trigger like so. Then you have a controller which mounts on the hot shoe, press the shutter button, fires the speed light, and away you go. All right, so the next thing I guess would be when I converted from Nikon to Sony, the first camera that I bought, and I use to this day, I use this as my webcam view. Sometimes I also have a Nexigo webcam. But when Gary Fong was probably instrumental, he was the one that Sony sent the A6000 to him, and he realized what a powerhouse of a camera it really was, and he started teaching and educating people as to the mirrorless system and how powerful this camera was. And so that's when I bought into the system. And so, you know, you start using, this is an APS-C camera, but you want to have a speed light that's going to fit your camera. And at the time I wasn't worried about red eye. I bought this camera because I wanted something smaller, so that if I went on vacation or something like that, it wasn't really heavy duty. But you still want to have a speed light. You can bounce the light off of the ceiling. You can get a little bit better pictures. Yeah, there's times where you're going to get red eye, but I mean, this setup is so, you know, effortless to carry with you. It's so lightweight. I mean, it's just amazing. But that's basically where I segued into the Sony system and the Godox Speedlight system. And the TT350 is probably the smallest Godox Speedlight that they make. And I don't tend to use it very much anymore because now I'm shooting with Sony A7 III or A7 IV for photography purposes. But again, that's where I started. So I just upgraded like that to my Sony A7 IV. Voila. I don't remember when, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. I was really happy with the Sony system, but I wanted to move into full frame, so I bought the A7 III. I mean, it's such a great camera, the A7 III. In fact, I'm shooting on it right now. And then recently picked up the A7 IV. So, you know, I had to adapt my speedlight system. And so what I did was, Godox makes a range of speed lights from the TT350. This is an 860 2 for Sony. And the beauty of this speed light, it's a lot bigger, okay? I think it gives you about 60 to 80 watt-seconds of power. And the radio trigger is built in. And the nice thing about these is that they run on lithium batteries. So, I mean, if you're doing a photo shoot or you're shooting weddings or something like this, I mean, you can run around a reception for, you know, a couple hours easy and not wear down the battery. In fact, in some cases, you probably go all day, just depending on how many pictures you're taking. But So there's an example of a third-party Speedlite, and I think these ones, I'll put some prices in the description. I'm going to put links in the descriptions for this stuff, but these were not cheap. These are about $200, but OEM Speedlights, like if I was going to buy a Sony Speedlight, you know, they're upwards of $500. So there's a reason, there's my justification right there. I'm always trying to save money, looking for, you know, to maintain a budget if possible, but I have two of these, and this whole Godox system all works together, which is what's great. So if you remember earlier, we talked about the Gary Fong light sphere. Well, here's the Gen 5, okay? And you can use it with the dome or without the dome. And again, it's a great device for running around, doing an engagement shoot or doing, you know, at a wedding reception. And you're not going to get a bad picture. If you just want to focus on taking the pictures, or if you're new to wedding photography, this is the way to go. And the beauty of this thing is that, I mean, it's strong as anything. It has a special type of silicone they've used. It sticks like, you know, cement to your Speedlite. Gary Fong's done lots of videos where he's holding up his whole camera Speedlite whole setup like this and shaking it, and the thing's not coming loose. So, but the beauty of it is that it collapses down like this to a very small form factor, and you can put it in your bag a lot easier, which is why I like it. Whoops, it's come off there. But yeah, so there you go. And there's a little Velcro strap on the outside to hold it. And I think these are about, I don't know, 65 bucks, something like that. But so there's my two main Speedlights for my Sony system. And the nice thing is I have two triggers that I can use to control these. So the first one that I'll show you, the first one that I bought is it's the X1TS. So if you're buying Godox products, make sure it says S for Sony, C for Canon, N for Nikon. And then you've got no worries. So I bought this, and I also have the Sony version of the Xpro trigger, which shows you, it basically allows you to have more groups. So you can see there's 5 groups right here. And the difference between these two is basically the angle of view. This one mounts on like so, and this one mounts like this. And honestly, I find that I use, so this is the X1T. I have the latest one, which is the X2T, and this is the one that I typically use the most. So the reason for it is that if I've got the camera mounted on the stand there, I'm doing a photo shoot in the studio here, the camera's at this height, I can see the LCD screen here, as opposed to if I use the Xpro, you know, I can sort of see the screen, but I have to tip the camera up like that. So it really depends on your personal preference. But from experience, so far, of all of these, I use the X2T the most. And the difference between the X1T and the X2T is, you can see here that your group buttons are right down the side. So everything is just a little bit easier with the X2T. But with this system, I can mount this on my camera like so, and I can fire these Speedlights, my AD200 Pro, and also a couple of studio strobes that I have, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So I'd be remiss if I didn't give you a real-world demonstration. So what I've done is, you'll notice that I've got all my Speedlights marked A, B, C. It just makes it easier to see them from a distance, and then you know if you want to vary the power over here, vary the power over here, you know, it's so easy to discern. If you don't mark them, you'll get confused. And so I want to focus on my creative, the creative aspects of the photo shoot I'm working on, not worrying on figuring out which Speedlight I'm triggering. And so with this system here, and the reason for the chartreuse paint is that, you know, a lot of camera bags have black interiors, so you throw stuff into a bag. This just makes it a lot easier to see, and the chartreuse, it's like a beacon. You can spot it a mile away. And so once the radio trigger is set up on your camera like so, you're going to take a picture. Apologies for the flash on the screen there, but I can fire C, B, A. I can vary the power over here, 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 and I can do it all from the convenience of this little controller right here. And so My message to you right now would be, if you're looking for a set of flashes that is affordable, 100% reliable. I have all of this, my Godox products, I've had no problems with them whatsoever, okay? The AD200 Pro is essentially two of these speed lights built into one. And a lot of times I can go out and do a shoot, I can put this on a light stand and get away with just this one here. You know, maybe if I need a hair light, I'll use another flash, but because it has the bare bulb, it gives you a really nice light, and you can use some modifiers with it as well, which I'll talk about next. So before we talk about the modifiers, just quickly, when you purchase this system here, you've got a couple of things that you have to do for setup, and it's pretty straightforward. Stuff a couple of AA batteries into them, into your controller, and then you want to make sure that you're all on the same channel. So this controller, this speedlight is all on channel 1. So when I press the shutter button, I'm firing everything at the same time. I'm not saying you can't have this one on channel 2, this one on channel 3, this one on channel 4, but for most of what I do, I just have everything on the one channel, and then I can vary the power levels individually between the 3. So I set this so it's channel 1, and then if I'm going to modify the power output from Speedlight C over here, all I need to do is press on the C button here, and I can vary the power level here on the LCD screen. And that's, you know, very straightforward. Now you can vary the power levels manually on the back of the Speedlight, even on the AD200 Pro, but again, then you're running back and forth to your lighting system, and it's inefficient. And so yeah, it's just a lot easier. It gives you a lot more convenience, a lot more control. That's why you want to use something like this. So again, I'm leaning towards, you know, my recommendation for a beginner, if you're going to buy into the Godox system, is, you know, buy a speed light like this one. This is the 860 V2, and get yourself an X2T, and you'll be off to the races. You'll have your speed light is going to be off the camera. You'll take a lot better pictures. Your photography will go from here to here just by taking your speed light off the camera. Okay, so the next thing we should do, I guess, is let's talk about the AD200 Pro. It's definitely more powerful. It's very compact. It comes with a bare bulb or not. So let me just turn this puppy off here, and the bulb system comes off, and you can snap on the Fresnel head to it. And the beauty of the Fresnel head is that now you open yourself up to this little set of modifiers like this, where the barn doors just snaps on top like that, and then you've got some control over the light, top and bottom. So that's kind of cool for sure. The other thing that you can do is you can use a grid. So you can also put a grid here. I believe this guy fits on something like that over top, but it just gives you more choices, more creativity for your photography. So now let's pop this off, and let me put on the bare bulb again. Now, the way I shoot the most with the AD200 Pro is I use this little modifier. This is like a $12. It slides over like this, and you'll be amazed the pictures that you can get with just this simple system. You can also get, there's a blue tint here. So let's take this off for you so you can see. So you got a gel that you can build in, and you'll get, you know, half a dozen different colors. Like so, you can pop this in. That fits on over top like that. And this setup here will overpower the sun depending on how bright things are. So if you want to get into shooting high speed sync, then this was a good way to start out for me, and I use it to this day. With the exception that if the sun is really strong, and then I've got to go from like 200 watt seconds to 600 watt seconds, I'll use one of my other monoblocks, and we'll talk about monoblocks in a second. And another modifier that you can use is you can also get these little shower gel things and put them over top, and that will give you a tint effect as well. So there's just a super wide range of flexibility with the Godox system, which is why I love it. So before we move on into studio strobes and monoblocks and sync cables and all that good stuff, I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't show you a couple of ways to mount your speedlights, and this is the one that I use the most. So you can take your Godox speedlight, you can shove it into this thing like so. Just snug that down, and this sucker ain't going anywhere, and it mounts onto a 5/8 pin on top of a light stand. And this is probably the way that I work the most or use the most. And then this is a Bowen's S mount, so that this thing here will fit into a beauty dish, 1001 different modifiers. So again, if you're just starting out, you want to save some money. These things are about 25 bucks. S2 Pro and the late S2 bracket. The latest one, the reason I like it is that this is smooth here. Okay, it's very, the older ones, they had like a ratchet, and I didn't like them. They were kind of very difficult to operate, but the new S2 bracket is great. I mean, it's really smooth, and it has a hole here if you want to use this with an umbrella instead of a softbox. So you've got that option. Now, another option is, earlier we talked about, you know, taking a speed light and putting it on top of a radio trigger like this, and then that would fit into a little cleat on top of a light stand. Well, it gets wobbly, and it doesn't exactly inspire confidence. So if you're looking for a way, this is a homemade hack that I made, and I use this thing a fair amount. I have two of them, actually. You make it out of a piece of cutting board. You know the plastic cutting boards that you can get for your kitchen? You can buy them at the dollar store super cheap. Just cut out a piece like this, screw in a 5/8 stud so that it'll fit in the top of your light stand. And then you can take your speed light like this, and you can just strap it around like that. And it holds the speed light really securely. And what I'll do is I'll take a little ball head and put it on here. So then I can move this thing around to any angle I want. But this is a really good hack. There you can see the white cutting board there. I actually have a video on this as well. I should put a link to that in the description for you. But that is a very useful tool for sure. Okay, moving right along here, the next thing we're going to discuss is studio strobes. And the thing about studio strobes, I own two of them, and I have them for one primary purpose, and that's when I want to use a strip box on either side of a model, because I'm going to take that model and comp them into some different background that's not really normal to it. So it's a manipulation or a composite type situation. And I did that in this photograph here. Okay, so what's the deal about studio strobes? Well, studio strobes are a little different. They have a modeling light bulb, okay? And so the beauty of the modeling light is that you can turn it on the back, and you can see where the shadow is falling on your subject's face. And there are some speedlights that actually have modeling lights built in, but when using them outdoors, they're not very powerful. So that's the idea of the modeling light, is just allows you to see where the shadows, the light's falling on your model's face, and then you can make adjustments that way. Now you can do high-speed sync with studio strobes. These are Flashpoint R2 Pros. That's Godox, okay? So my Godox controller can control these. So if I want to take a picture with these, there you go. Now, the main difference is, I don't know if you can hear this or not, but there's a little fan. The studio strobes are designed so so they can run continuously, but they have a little fan in there to cool them down. Because the idea is, in a studio where you're firing, you know, pop, 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 you're going to build up heat in these type of strobes, and so hence the fan to keep things cool. You've got an LCD screen on the back, and there's also a sync cable. So if you had to, I could run a sync cable from my sync port on the manual controller over to here, the port on the back of the R2, and fire it that way. So why would you want to use studio strobes? Well, if you're doing a lot of work in the studio, you're doing a shoot, maybe you're doing a catalog for one of the big department stores or something like that, you got 10 different models coming in, then being able to have a flash like this where it's plugged into the wall, you don't have to worry about the batteries going dead, and you've got all the control, all the adjustments on this system almost the same as what you have on your regular speedlights, with the exception is that these studio strobes will only do high-speed sync from, I think it's 1/16 to full power. But that's not really an issue in the studio, so it's a good option. If you're, you know, like I say, you're doing a lot of shooting repeatedly, then you might want to go to a studio strobe. And you have the group functionality. You can set channels with these as well. As you can see, I've got them set to D. So, you know, my AD200 Pro is A, there's Speedlight C, the other one is B, and this is D. And so, and the other one of these, which I have, is labeled E. So it's just easier to see, make adjustments on your controller, and away you go. And you've got some other minor adjustments here, like there's a dial on the back of this guy, and you can dial up the power like this manually, or I can do it from here. I typically tend to do it from here, it just saves me running back and forth. But you notice the brightness of the modeling light goes up or down according to the power setting that you're changing on the studio strobe. So, and then you've got a little button on the back. And studio strobes typically come with a cord that's about 20 to 25 feet long. That's a nice heavy duty thing that you can plug into the wall. But, you know, the one shortcoming is, unless you're taking a generator out onto a shoot, these things are useless out in the field. So it's just something to think about, which allows us to segue into monoblocks. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the difference between our studio strobe and our monoblock. Okay, now this one is a Flashpoint Studio 300R2. This one is a Flashpoint RL600-B. Both of these came from Adorama Camera in New York. However, they have one significant difference. Well, maybe two or three. Okay, the studio strobe plugs into your household's AC power. The monoblock doesn't. This is designed to be used out in the field. It's got a honking big battery on it. So for versatility, for use out in the field, this is the one I go to. The most important difference between these two is that this one is manufactured by Godox, so it plays natively with my controller. This one here is manufactured by Jinbei. So if we're going to use this and I want it to speak to this here, we have to use another controller that will adapt to this, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So that's the big difference here, is that this is designed to use indoor on AC power. This one here has a battery pack, but it's a really big battery, so I mean you can do a full shoot with it. If you're doing high-speed sync out at a beach or something like that, no worries, you can take this thing. The only difference is fairly heavy. This guy here is fairly lightweight because there's no battery in it. It's just a little fan motor, and away you go. So now we can talk a little bit about the monoblock, and you can see here, I mean, this thing probably weighs a pound or a pound and a half. This is the battery for this bad boy, which fits into the back of it like so. And there's a button on the back here. I can just hold this down for a second. You'll hear it beep, the thing comes to life. And so how do we use it? So the way you use it, it comes with a manual controller. And you can use this little controller here to vary the power up and down on the back remotely. But the question that you've got now, oh my God, Paul, I want to use this because it's a Jinbei system with my Godox system and one of my Godox speedlights, or 2 or 3 or 4 of them, or whatever you've got. So, so the way this works is, I'll just show you here. You hold down this button here, and it basically makes a connection to the monoblock, and then you can do a test. And before you do any of that, when you take it out of the box, you put your battery in, the first thing you got to do is, there's some dip switches on the front of this controller. You want to make sure that the dip switches, I've got them all set to up, and so they're the same on this. So this guy will actually talk to this one. And this monoblock, like the studio strobe, will only do high-speed sync from 1/16 power and above. It won't go below that. So if you need something really low, then you've got to use a speedlight for less power. But if you want to do, if you're in a situation you want to use your Jinbei product with your Godox speedlights, then all you need to do is take this, slide it on the top of your hot shoe, and you'll be able to do high-speed sync, because the camera is going to do high-speed sync. The monoblock will do high-speed sync. It's really the signal you need into the manual trigger, and then you're off to the races. So I've got my speedlight turned on here. Oh, maybe it's gone to sleep. There it is. Back up and running. Okay. And so just remember that you have to be above the, so the sync speed on your camera, on my camera, is a 2/50th of a second. And so I've got my, let's see here, I'm at 1/400 at f/16. And so if I press the shutter, everything works. And I'll show you that picture here. Let's see, it's probably a little blown out. Oh, it's not too bad. A lot of power coming off of this thing here, but it's, you know, something this big, 600 watt-seconds, designed to be used outdoors to overpower the sun. So if you've got a model on the beach and she's got her back to the sunset, this thing is going to fill and push in that light and fill in the face and give you some really nice effects. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at Jason Lanier's YouTube channel. I mean, he's got tons of videos showing using the RL600-B and this little radio trigger on top of his A6000 or his A7 III or whatever he's shooting now, I don't know. But he's just one of many. Gary Fong, Jason Lanier are probably two good examples of guys that have done tons of high-speed sync shooting. And so the reason for high-speed sync is that it allows us, when we've got lenses that are wide apertures 1.4 and you want to darken down the sky, you have the ability to do that using the high-speed sync functionality. And so, and the beauty of the Godox system is that by just taking the trigger from this monoblock, you can put it on top of the controller and you can do high-speed sync without any issues whatsoever. All right, before I wrap this up, one thing I wanted to point out is I talked a little bit in the beginning of the video about sync cables and when to use them, when not to use them. I did a whole video for the Godox X1R receiver. And I'll put a link to that video here. You can, you know, take a look at that one. But the Jinbei has a sync cable on it. So if for some reason you didn't have this little controller here, that's when you'd want to run a 3.5 millimeter cable from the sync port on the controller over to the sync port on the monoblock. And, you know, you'd be able to control it that way. But out in the field, you know, you'd need a cable that was a mile long. So it's not something you want to do. So just make sure that you keep a hold of your little controller here that comes with your monoblock and you'll be off to the races. Now, there's all different kinds of monoblocks, you know, Broncolor, Profoto, Alien Bees. The primary reason I use the Godox system is because they're stone reliable, they're cost effective, and they're an ecosystem that everything talks to everything. I don't use Profoto because the cost of one Profoto light is like $2,000 compared to, you know, I don't know, $600 or $700 for something like this. And so Profoto, Broncolor, I'm not saying they're bad equipment. I'm saying they're painfully expensive. Alien Bees was a cost-effective system that came out years ago, but I don't know too many people that use them now. I think Godox, for my money, Godox is the way to go for sure. So let's wrap this up for you. I'm not even sure I can remember all the stuff we covered in this video. Speedlights, radio triggers, monoblocks, studio strobes, flashes, fill flash, you know, Gary Fong light spheres. You name it, I think we've touched on it a little bit. And don't forget the X1R video. So if you found this video useful, it helps me if you'd hit the subscribe and like button. I'd really appreciate it. Hit the notification bell, and I'll bring you more good content like this in the future. So thanks again for watching, and by all means, if you have questions or you need help with a certain situation, connect in and ask me. I'm happy to hear your comments, and you know, just keep it clean, folks. Other than that, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.